3. The Palace. The Queen's consort, Prince Albert, was a big man with an impressive handlebar mustache and a receding hairline, and he was undeniably and entirely human. He met us in the corridor, nodded to my friend and to me, did not ask us for our names or offer to handshakes. "The Queen is most upset," he said. He had an accent. He pronounced his S's as Z's, most upset. Franz was one of her favorites. She had so many nephews, but he made her laugh so. She will find the ones who did this to him. You will find the ones who did this to him. I will do my best, said my friend. I have read your monographs, said Prince Albert. It was I who told them that you should be consulted. I hope I did right. As do I, said my friend. And then the great door was opened, and we were ushered into the darkness and the presence of the Queen. She was called Victoria because she had beaten us in battle 700 years before, and she was called Gloriana because she was glorious, and she was called the Queen because the human mouth was not shaped to say her true name. She was huge, huger than I had imagined possible, and she squatted in the shadows, staring down at us without moving. This must be solved. The words came from the shadows. Indeed, madam, said my friend. A limb squirmed and pointed to me. Zet forward. I wanted to walk. My legs would not move. My friend came to my rescue then. He took me by the elbow and walked me toward Her Majesty. Is not to be afraid, is to be worthy, is to be companion. That was what she said to me. Her voice was very sweet contralto, with a distant buzz. Then the limb uncoiled and extended, and she touched my shoulder. There was a moment, not only a moment, of pain deeper and more profound than anything I have ever experienced, and then it was replaced by a pervasive sense of well-being. I could feel the muscles in my shoulder relax, and for the first time since Afghanistan, I was free from pain. Then my friend walked forward. Victoria spoke to him, yet I could not hear her words. I wondered if they went, somehow, directly from her mind to his, if this was the Queen's Council I had read about in the histories. He replied out loud, Certainly, ma'am. I can tell you that there were 2 other men with your nephew in that room in Shoreditch. That night the footprints were, although obscured, unmistakable. And then, yes, I understand. I believe so. Yes. He was quiet when we left the palace and said nothing to me as we rode back to Baker Street. It was dark already. I wondered how long we had to spend in the palace. Fingers of sooty fog twined across the road and the sky. Upon our return to Baker Street, in the looking-glass of my room, I observed that the frog-white skin across my shoulder had taken on a pinkish tinge. I hoped that I was not imagining it, that it was not merely the moonlight through the window. Part 4. The Performance. That my friend was a master of disguise should have come as no surprise to me, yet surprise me it did. Over the next 10 days, a strange assortment of characters came in through our door in Baker Street. An elderly Chinese man, a young Roe, a fat red-haired woman whose former profession there could have been little doubt, and a venerable old buffer, his foot swollen and bandaged from gout. Each of them would walk into my friend's room, and, with a speed that would have done justice to a music hall, quick change artist, my friend would walk out. He would not talk about what he had been doing on these occasions, preferring to relax, staring off into space, occasionally making notations on any scrap of paper to hand, notations I found frankly incomprehensible. He seemed entirely preoccupied, so much so that I found myself worrying about his well-being. And then, Late one afternoon, he came home dressed in his own clothes, with an easy grin upon his face. He asked if I was interested in the theatre. As much as the next man, I told him. Then fetch your opera glasses, he told me. We are off to Drury Lane. I had expected a light opera or something of the kind, but instead I found myself in what must have been the worst theatre in Drury Lane. For all that, it had named itself after the royal court. And to be honest, it was barely in Drury Lane at all, being situated in Shaftesbury Avenue, end of the road, where the avenue approaches the rookery of St. Giles. On my friend's advice, I concealed my wallet, and following his example, I carried a stout stick. Once we were seated in the stalls, I had bought a threepenny orange from one of the lovely women who sold them to the members of the audience, and I sucked it as we were waiting. My friend said quietly, "You should only count yourself lucky that you did not need to accompany me to the gambling dens or the brothels, or the madhouses, another place that Prince Franz delighted in visiting, as I have learned. But there was nowhere he went to more than once. Nowhere but." The orchestra struck up. The curtain raised. My friend was silent. It was a fine enough show in its way. 3 one-act plays were performed. Comic songs were sung between the acts. The leading man was tall, languid, and had a fine singing voice. The leading lady was elegant, and her voice carried through all the theatre. The comedian had a fine touch for patter songs. The first play was a broad comedy of mistaken identities. The leading man played a pair of identical twins who had never met, but had managed, by a set of comical misadventures, each to find himself engaged to be married to the same young lady, who, amusingly, thought herself engaged to only one man. Doors swung open and closed as the actor changed from identity to identity. The second play was a heartbreaking tale of an orphan girl who starved in the snow, selling hothouse violets. Her grandmother recognized her at the last, and swore that she was the babe stolen 10 years back by bandits, but it was too late. The frozen little angel breathed her last breath. The frozen little angel breathed her last. I must confess, I found myself wiping my eyes with my linen handkerchief more than once. The performance finished with a rousing historical narrative. The entire company played the men and women of a village on the shore of the ocean 700 years before our modern times. They saw shapes rising from the sea in the distance. The hero joyously proclaimed to the villagers that these were the old ones whose coming was foretold, returning to us from R'lyeh and from dim Carcosa and from the plains of Lane, where they had slept or waited or passed out the time of their death. The companion opined that the other villagers had all been eating too many pies and drinking too much ale, and they were imagining the shapes. A portly gentleman playing a priest of the Roman god tells the villagers that the shapes in the sea were the monsters and demons that must be destroyed. At the climax, the hero beat the priest to death with his own crucifier and prepared to welcome them as they came. The heroine sang a haunting aria, whilst in an astonishing display of magic lantern trickery, it seemed as if we saw their shadows cross the sky at the back of the stage. The Queen Albion herself, and the Black One of Egypt, in the shape of almost like a man, followed by the ancient goat, parent to 1,000, emperor of all China, and the Tsar unanswerable, and he who presides over the New World, and the White Lady of the Antarctic fastness, and the others. And as each shadow crossed the stage and appeared, from out of every throat in the gallery came an unbidden and mighty huzzah, until the air itself seemed to vibrate. The moon rose in the painted sky, and then, at its height, in one final moment of theatrical magic, it turned from a pallid yellow, as it was in the old tales, to the comforting crimson of the moon, and that shines down upon all of us today. The members of the cast took their bows and the curtain calls to the cheers and laughter, and the curtain fell for the last time. The show was done. "There," said my friend. "What did you think?" "Jolly, jolly good," I told him, my hands sore from applauding. "Stout fellow," he said with a smile. "Let us go backstage." We walked outside into an alley beside the theater to the stage door, where a thin woman with a wen on her cheek knitted busily. My friend showed her a visiting card, and she directed us into the building and up some steps to a small communal dressing room. Oil lamps and candles guttered in front of us smeared looking-glasses, and men and women were taking off their makeup and costumes with no regard to the proprieties of gender. I averted my eyes. My friend seemed unperturbed. "Might I talk to Mr. Vernet?" he asked loudly. A young woman, who had played the heroine's best friend in the play, and the saucy innkeeper's daughter in the last, pointed us to the end of the room. "Sherry Vernet!" she called. The young man who stood up in response was lean, less conventionally handsome than he had seemed from the other side of the footlights. He peered at us quizzically. "I do not believe I've had the pleasure." "My name is Henry Camberley," said my friend, drawing his speech somewhat. "You may have heard of me." "I must confess that I have not had the privilege," said Vernet. My friend presented the actor with an engraved card. The man looked at the card with unfeigned interest. "A theatrical promoter from the New World! My! And this is—" he looked at me. "This is a friend of mine, Mr. Sebastian. He is not of the profession." I muttered something about having enjoyed the performance enormously and shook hands with the actor. My friend said, "Have you ever visited the New World?" "I have not yet had that honor," admitted Vernet, "although it has always been my dearest wish." "Well, my good man," said my friend, with the easy informality of the New Worlder, "maybe you'll get your wish. That last play. I've never seen anything like it. Did you write it?" "Alas, no. The playwright was a good friend of mine, although I devised the mechanism of the magic lantern shadow show. You'll see no finer on the stage today." "Would you give me the playwright's name? Perhaps I should speak to him directly, this friend of yours." Vernet shook his head. "That will not be possible, I'm afraid. He is a professional man, and does not wish his connection with the stage publicly to be known." "I see." My friend pulled a pipe from his pocket and put it in his mouth. Then he patted his pockets. "I am sorry," he began. "I have forgotten to bring my tobacco pouch." "I smoke a strong black shag," said the actor, "but if you have no objection—" "None," said my friend heartily. "Why, I smoke a strong shag myself." He filled the pipe with the actor's tobacco, and the two men puffed away, while my friend described a vision he had for a play that he could tour the cities of the New World, from the Manhattan Island all the way to the furthest tip of the continent in the distant South. The first act would be the last play we had seen. The rest of the play might perhaps tell the dominion of the old ones over humanity and its gods, perhaps telling what might have happened if people had had no royal families to look up to, a world of barbarianism and darkness. But your mysterious professional man would be the play's author, and what occurs would be his alone to decide," interjected my friend. "Our drama would be his. But I can guarantee you audiences beyond your imaginations, and a significant share of the takings at the door. Let us say 50%. "This is most exciting," said Vernet. "I hope it will not turn out to have been a pipe dream." "No, sir, it shall not," said my friend, puffing on his own pipe, chuckling at the man's joke. "Come to my rooms in Baker Street tomorrow morning, after breakfast time, say at 10, in company with your author friend, and I shall have the contracts drawn up and waiting." With that, the actor clambered up onto his chair and clapped his hands for silence. "Ladies and gentlemen of the company, I have an announcement to make," he said, his resonant voice filling the room. "This gentleman, Henry Camberley, the theatrical promoter, and he is proposing to take us all across the Atlantic Ocean and on to fame and fortune." There were several cheers, and the comedian said, "Well, it'll make change from herrings and pickled cabbage. and the company laughed.